Hello, this is Amy, and welcome to Wired for Change. Today, we're going to have a look at the third part of the Transformation Dream Team series about architecture in motion and designing systems for change. Just before we get into the episode, I'd like to ask you to subscribe if you haven't already. I'm an independent, authentic voice for digital transformation, just trying to help surface more information that will help people to execute better on digital transformation and to work their way through some of the many challenges that come up. I'm impact driven and hoping to reach more people as much as possible. So please do subscribe. And if you've already subscribed, I thank you for that. All right, let's get to today's episode. Architecture in motion. What do architects, emperors, inventors, and animators have in common? They might have more in common than you think, especially when it comes to digital transformation. In today's episode, we're going to examine roles that help organizations design for change, not just envision it, but build the structures and systems, bringing people, process, and technology together to help bring experiences to life. We'll meet the system orchestrator, the experience designer, and the tech trailblazer, three vital players that bring strategy and turn it into execution and systems. So let's start with the first one, the systems orchestrator. And for each of these roles, I'll be talking about the role, how it might relate to roles that you already have in your organization, but maybe with a twist or a slightly new purpose. An inspiring historical character to use as an example, and ways that we can translate that into practice today. So with a system orchestrator, you may know them as the enterprise architect, the strategic planner, or a chief architect. The systems orchestrator will align all the moving parts, the people, processes, and platforms into a cohesive design. They see the blueprint and the battlefield. So they'll see the blueprint for how the business needs to move in order to get into the future that it wants, the goals and the strategy, the business purpose, what will stay, and what will change, and the battlefield. Sort of the battle that you'll be wading into, what exists, what might come up and bite you, the forces at play, even before the battle starts, and know how to build for scale, complexity, and purpose. The historical figure I've chosen is Julius Caesar for this role. Now, Julius Caesar wasn't just a military leader, he was a systems thinker. He restructured the Roman calendar, overhauled tax collection, reformed local governance, and laid the foundation for what would become the Roman Empire. His genius wasn't just in conquest, but in designing systems that could outlast him. Why did I choose the name orchestrator? Well, orchestrator is actually one of my favorite ways of describing what a chief digital officer does. It reflects coordination, composition, and deliberate design. It implies intelligence and intentionality, sort of the why behind things, and always asking the why and understanding that why. Not just building, but conducting the teams and the forces at play and seeing where those forces will end up before they're there, and how to plan for the supply lines that are needed for the front lines. In digital transformation, so relating Julius Caesar back to digital transformation, this might be the person who's designing the technical and organizational architecture for a new integrated care delivery system, ensuring that data, user flows, security, and stakeholder needs are all aligned. These are all very different facets of a transformation, but they need to be coordinated and come together in a way that makes sense. So, who is keeping your transformation from becoming a disconnected mess of tools and initiatives? Have you ever heard of the term digital sprawl? I know I have. This is what happens when there's little orchestration. And I don't mean to belittle organizations who have a lot of digital sprawl. Sometimes things are, out of the control of the people who might be considered the orchestrator of things if there is a lack of governance, or if it is very easy for any user in an organization to adopt the tools that they want, if the underlying system doesn't support that. A lot has changed over the last 20 years. For example, the decisions between on-prem versus hybrid versus cloud were not always the easiest ones to make. And thinking about individual systems or platforms or tools versus the overall organizational architecture and structure that you want within constraints is not an easy thing, especially when vendors are acting independently with product roadmaps that you might depend on, or new technologies are emerging that suddenly become a priority, or if you're trying to balance the existing systems in current state in addition to the future-facing systems in current state. How do you map, what's what, and how do people know what processes or systems they should be using for what during the transition, and then when is the transition done? There's a lot to come together, especially when there's a lot of moving pieces. But it's important to come up with what I think of as a unifying theory of how things should work at any given time and what that looks like, for the future, if you're going to outlast some of the things that are to come. So that unifying theory is something that should be simply understood. Have the ability to be simply understood by people. It should have hypotheses and guidelines for how things should be done. And it should reflect on something that is usable. And even if some of these hypotheses are wrong or prove out to be wrong, at least you've got, an understanding of the why going in, and then you can adapt as things change or move forward. And of course, things should be based on where you want the organization to go in the future. The next role I want to look at is the experience designer. So you might know this role as the UX lead, or the human-centered designer, or the customer experience strategist. The experience designer brings empathy, creativity, and intentional design to the forefront. They're not just making things usable, they're making things meaningful. For the historical figure, I've chosen Walt Disney. Walt Disney didn't just create cartoons, he designed worlds. He famously said Disneyland would never be completed as long as there was imagination left. Disney pioneered the idea of scripting every touch point, from ride queues to employee uniforms, to ensure a consistent, emotionally resonant experience. Why did I choose the name experience designer? Why not just stick with UX leader? From a digital transformation perspective, or an overall transformation perspective, an experience designer keeps the focus on what people actually feel and do, not just the interface of things, but the entire journey and all the different layers that make up that journey. For example, at Disney, it's not just the customer experience that some of us might be quite familiar with, but it's also the employee experience, and knowing that employees are called cast members, for instance, and that they are given the autonomy to improve individual customer experience. Think about how empowering that must be for them. And then also the way that they're able to contribute to community service initiatives as well. There are many pieces of the employee experience that are almost cult-like in terms of how it was designed. And that design flows through to the customer experience, and then it goes back again. So it goes back and forth, and it's really envisionable as an entire flow. In digital transformation, this might be the person who's mapping the end-to-end patient or employee experience across digital and physical touchpoints, spotting friction, gaps, or unmet emotional needs. I remember one context in which we were looking at the needs for nurses and needed to realize that nurses might be at stations that don't belong to them, unlike employees who might be desk-based employees, for instance. And how would that experience differ? And what is the context that those nurses are working in? And we mapped out many, many personas for many nurses in different types of roles, because that was the important piece of redesigning that service experience. Are your systems being designed for people or just being handed to them? A service design approach, and that's something that you can look up if you're not familiar with it, can be a good way to get into that internal-external flow so that you're looking at both the back-of-house experience and the front-of-house experience at the same time. An example that I can think of is the New York City Service Design Studio, which is something that they stood up in order to improve the service design experience for many, and for the back of house as well as the front of house. This design studio helped to improve the public's experience across many social services. Some of their projects included improving the way that the food stamp application experience was conducted, simplifying shelter access for unhoused populations, and co-designing job training programs with frontline workers. There are many benefits for the employees as well that were part of these experiences. The staff, and including the fact that the staff involved in the co-design reported greater morale and ownership, and cross-departmental collaboration became easier and more productive. I know that when I have applied this approach, after defining some of the goals and problems to be solved and identifying all the different people across the different touch points, and then prioritizing the different journey maps that were possible, I did employ journey maps to do this. Now, journey maps aren't a new tool, but they are always something that helps to bring new insights. After layering on and examining the different aspects of an experience that a person looks at and different types of people as well, it's almost impossible not to gain a new insight, even though it's not a new type of tool. And while today we can use AI to accelerate some of this research with respect to journey maps and personas, I've always found that it misses things. So, especially when you look at the physical reality, that is something that is harder for AI to grasp of how people might actually be doing their work. One other thing I'll mention about the service design or experience design piece of things is an episode that I'm thinking of that I recorded a few weeks ago with innovation and at the Abilities Living Lab, where we looked at the conceptual or the innovation part of the process as well. So if you have the customer user part of the experience, and then you have the employee part of the experience or the person who's delivering that experience, you can even go as far back as the conceptualization of that experience or design in the first place. And that in itself is an experience. And that alludes to the co-design part of things, for instance. And so going that far back can really help to bake in kind of the values of the experience that you're trying to convey at the end of the day for the entire people experience that you have. The third role that I want to look at today is the Tech Trailblazer. So you might know this person as the tech geek or the technologist or the emerging tech advisor, the CTO, the R&D lead, or maybe just the mad scientist in your organization. The Tech Trailblazer is the one who sees possibilities where others see barriers. They chase the frontier and ask what if long before the organization might be ready. But going beyond that person who's just the pure tech geek, there's someone who also recognizes where the organization is at and understands how to position new technology in a way that is very self-aware. So for the historical figure that I've chosen, Nikola Tesla, he imagined many, many things. Nikola Tesla imagined wireless power, radio communication, and robotics well before the world caught up. He wasn't just a dreamer. He was a relentless builder of prototypes, constantly iterating, testing, and experimenting with the future. He went beyond just talking about the technologies to really experimenting and looking at how they could be applied. Why the name Trailblazer? Well, I chose Trailblazer because this tech trailblazer or this person is often alone or is defining a sandbox of a sort. If you picture someone trailblazing through the jungle, they're often out on their own. They're not taking the entire team with them right behind them as they're doing that. Maybe they are a little bit, but they're always a few steps ahead and always operating within a defined sort of sense of reality that they have. And not necessarily risking everyone that they have who's following behind them at the same time. It's breaking new ground, it's taking risks, and it's clearing the path for others. Clearing the path for others requires an understanding of the others' capabilities and what the others are trying to achieve. It's about both inspiration, iteration, and understanding. If I look at transformation and think about how that applies, this is the person who is bringing in generative AI, edge computing, or low-code platforms, not because they're trendy, but because they solve real problems in new ways. And I use those as examples cautiously because it is July of 2025. And in September of 2025, much of this probably would have changed. And your tech trailblazer will be on top of that and have guesses as to where things are going and be able to see where things are going so that you can be prepared as well. Are you leaving enough room in your systems for things that don't exist yet? It's a real delicate balance with tech trailblazers. Sometimes you're damned if you listen to them and you're damned if you don't. There are people who love shiny things, who might over-listen to a tech trailblazer and jump on board a little bit too quickly, ignoring the people and the process side of things. But you can also have people who under-listen to the tech trailblazer and use systems and tools in ways that they're not meant to be used, introducing risk and cost over the long run. So it's important to have a good balance and a level of understanding that helps to guide the interaction with the tech trailblazer and the direction of the organization. It helps if you've got a great balance between the three roles that I talked about today, the systems orchestrator, the experience designer, and the tech trailblazer, because there will be trade-offs to navigate. And if they have great communication between all three, all the better. That becomes a superpower for your team. So to wrap it up, digital transformation isn't just about moving fast. It's about building systems that last, serve, and adapt. One of a CEO's greatest nightmares is to be investing in building systems today that will become obsolete tomorrow. The systems orchestrator will design for cohesion, the experience designer designs for people, and the tech trailblazer designs for what's next. Together, they keep your architecture in motion, the title of today's episode: flexible, intentional, and human-centered. So for you, which of these roles might be missing, undervalued, or just not thought about in your current transformation effort? And what would change if these roles were fully empowered with the right people? Thanks so much for listening. Again, I would encourage you to subscribe if you've enjoyed today's episode, or if you're interested in digital transformation, and to contribute if you've got ideas about how to move us all forward. Thanks for listening to Wired for Change.